Now, a motion to remove the statue of England's Queen Victoria has been received favorably in the KwaZulu-Natal legislature. It will be replaced by one of the late Zulu King Goodwill Zwelithini Kabheka Zulu. Now, the statue is expected to be erected outside the legislature building. To unpack this further, we'll chat to MEC for Economic Development, for Tourism and Environmental Affairs, Boniso Duma. Over to Faith.
Well, thank you very much for that, William. Let me pick up from there, of course, and it is about the erection of that statue there in the KZN legislature. And Mr. Duma, always a pleasure speaking to you. A very good morning. Let's talk a little bit about the significance of this. Of course, we've got the late King's monarch and the way that he was able to rule and preside over the Zulu nation over the past 50 years or so cannot be ignored. And of course, this, from what I understand, is the hope to actually memorize the contribution of the late King into bringing peace within the Zulu nation. How significant is it, especially with what is currently happening within the political discourse in the province currently?
Morning to you, Ms. Faith, your good self, and your viewers at home. I'm sure you know the ambiguity of economy and the contrast in the process of South Africa or in the outlook of the country called South Africa. So it's well known that during the era of Queen Victoria, during the oppression, during the apartheid, a lot of mineral endowments were taken to England. So it is always a reflection of oppression. Just imagine that on a daily basis we are subjected to that state. So we say that because we know we want to preserve history, although that statue belonged to a museum sham of Queen Victoria, nevertheless it should be preserved. Then let us do what we regard as the embodiment of unity within the nation of the Zulus in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, within the nation of KwaZulu-Natal as a province, which is non-racial in the character. Why don't we identify one of the strongest kings who survived the throne for the last 50 years? So it was going to be strategic enough just to catapult and attract investment, attract tourists to be coming just to see this giant monarch that was built by Isilo Sagaduguza King Shaka. So that is why we suggested that at this point in time, it might be strategic enough for us. What will unify us as the stakeholders, as the people of KwaZulu-Natal, as the constituents of KwaZulu-Natal? So, which is why we agreed upon, and I'm sure all the parties agreed, no, this is the right move. It must be adhered to, it must be implemented within the confinement of this space so that it starts showing who we are as the province of KwaZulu-Natal.
Yeah, but of course, it's such a tricky balancing act, right? So from a fundraising or from a financial perspective, the intentionality of the statue can never, ever be questioned. And simply because of how we still have statues that represent, number one, colonial South Africa, but two, apartheid South Africa that need to be brought down. So I think that the entire country will back you up on that and say there is no ways that we can live in a democratic dispensation, yet we still pay homage in some form or another to colonial, imperialists as well as, apartheid activists for that matter. But on the other side of it, it will be looking at how is it that budget can be repurposed and where the money is going to come from to actually be able to erect the statue. So the intention of it definitely cannot be questioned. But the fundraising of it, especially when we find ourselves in KwaZulu-Natal, where you have to really find the money to pull, especially with what happened within the floods that affected the province in April in 2022. So how are we seeing the fundraising going for this one, and maybe how will budget be repurposed to allow for the statue to be erected?
The Department for Arts and Culture, in the main, ideologically must balance such equations. I don't think it's even a skewed equation, because the issue of the statue of King Zwelithini Kabheka Zulu, at a face value and a glance, you might think that probably financial it might be costly, but the reality, the return investment or return on investment will be too highly, because I've already highlighted that from that time onwards, people will come just to be coming to see this gigantic character who lived in this era. So I think those are the issues. A lot of people go to Brazil just to see a certain statue. A lot of people go to America just to see that colossal statue. And that economically those countries have benefited. You go to countries like in the Middle East, they'll be going just to see a tomb because it is critical enough to be celebrated, to be preserved. So I think it will be critical, and it will always giving us a nice reminiscence that the king was able to promote agriculture during his era. The king was able to promote diversity amongst the KZN people. You will be able to remember that the king was able to promote even health because during his era they were able to revive the issue of circumcision amongst the young boys. So those are the issues that are critical for us to be promoted, and I'm sure the issue of the outlook. Arts and culture is worthy. Arts and culture is also equal to the task, and I'm sure you know that Umgungundlovu as a district remains the headquarters of KwaZulu-Natal, so it will be celebrated. It will also attract that corridor. Currently, the entry is being built by Sanral. It means that it is renovated. The issue of the district, the Umsondozi as well, must also revamp and revitalize the strategy so that we know that from now onwards, economic transformation will also be benefiting our youth and particular
Mr. Duma, just
women.
to interject on that note, and that's what I'm saying, that I want to labor on the point, because the intention of the statue is absolutely 100% one thing that I think all South Africans can truly relate with. We can no longer have colonial statues or statues that represent an apartheid dispensation in this country. 100% agree with you. It's just about, and you would know this, you know this, every time when it comes to such certain kinds of erections of either a flag, which is no longer happening, and a bust that will happen, there are always questions around transparency, and that's where I'm trying to get to here, is around the transparency within which the erection of the statue actually happens. Because what we don't want to find ourselves in is a situation now where you have a media report that comes out after the statue has been erected saying that the money was taken from here and therefore these services were not delivered, and therefore the very same intention that you had of education now gets marred by controversy, which I'm sure you're trying to avoid. So in light of that, let's talk a little bit about the transparency that will be involved. So, for example, who will be manufacturing the statue? Will it be locally manufactured? Are you going to be importing it from China? Who are the people that are coming into it? What is the cost of the statue that we're looking at? Just so that South Africans are kept aware of the intention of the KZN province.
I'm sure you know it's an early days for us to be giving the proper quantity, but the reality is that the stakeholders who are all going to be involved at the right time, it will be advertised nicely. I don't think that we'll have to go abroad just to be enticing the space of the service providers from China. I'm sure you are just saying it in a good gesture, but it will be procured locally. And we've been procuring a lot of statues local. Currently, we have a gigantic statue that is around King Shaka Airport, and the issue of transparency was there. Almost everyone is happy with the process. I'm sure you know by now that we are guided by PFMA, which is clinical on the approach that must be done. And at this point in time, you know that everyone, because it is done at the level of legislators, all the lawmakers were there. So they'll be able to play a proper monitoring role. There is a portfolio committee responsible for at this point in time in the province. You know that there is also a committee deals with finance, with SCOPA and the Premier and all the stakeholders. So it will be key that everyone is involved, which is why the legislature was the relevant platform to be debating this matter, so that everyone will follow. Even the media of this country will be able to be told on every process. So I don't think you must be bought. And it won't be an exorbitant price, because we'll follow the proper proponent and the value of what ought to be done. And I'm glad we are on the same alignment when it comes to the colossal statues that represent apartheid, the painful regime which characterized a very bad history and a distasteful process in the mouth of South Africans.
Yeah. Siboniso Duma, much appreciated for your time, MEC there of Economic Development, Tourism as well in KwaZulu-Natal, just giving us a little bit of that. It was a proposal was put forward in the KZN legislature to erect a statue of the late King Goodwill Zwelithini, and it looks as though it will be moving ahead, and it's more than anything else, it's just by keeping that transparency as that statue then becomes erected. Then I'm sure we'll fill you up on that one.